네, 여러분 안녕하십니까? 저는 오늘 행사의 진행을 맡은 김경미라고 합니다. 반갑습니다. 네, 바쁘신 중에도 오늘 자리를 빛내주시기 위해 참석해주신 귀빈 여러분들과 행사장을 가득 메워주신 참가자 여러분들께 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 이 스트롱 코리아 창조포럼은 지난 2006년 2월 대한민국 혁신포럼이란 명칭으로 출범한 이후 매해 사회 각 분야의 리더들이 대거 참여해 국가 성장 동력과 정부 혁신, 산업 경쟁력, 기업 생산성 강화 방안 등에 대한 해법을 제시해 오고 있습니다. 올해 포럼도 참가자 여러분들께 아주 유익한 시간이 되길 기대합니다. 네, 그럼 지금부터 스트롱 코리아 창조포럼 2014 개회식을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 개회식의 첫 번째 순서로 본 포럼의 주최기관인 한국경제신문 김기웅 사장님의 개회사가 있겠습니다. 김기웅 사장님을 단상으로 모시겠습니다.
여러분 대단히 반갑습니다. 저는 한국경제신문 사장 김기웅입니다. 먼저 바쁘신 가운데서도 이번 행사를 준비하는데 물심양면으로 도와주신 윤종록 미래창조과학부 차관님, 정민근 한국연구재단 이사장님, 박영하 한국과학기술기획평가원 원장님, 그리고 하태영 현대경제연구원장님께 깊은 감사의 인사를 드립니다. 또 일일이 소개해드리지 못하지만 이 자리를 빛내주신 경제계, 학계, 연구계 리더 여러분들께도 고마움의 뜻을 전합니다. 과학기술 분야의 인재 육성을 위해 시작된 스트롱 코리아 캠페인은 올해로서 12년째를 맞습니다. 지난 2002년 저희 한국경제신문은 언론사 최초로 과학기술 육성 캠페인인 스트롱 코리아를 시작했습니다. 지난해는 미래창조과학부를 공동 주관기관으로 모시고 한층 업그레이드된 포럼을 열게 되었습니다. Strong은 Science and Technology Research Our National Goal의 머리글자를 따서 한국경제신문사가 장명한 캠페인 브랜드입니다. 과학과 기술 분야에 대한 연구와 인재 육성이 우리의 국가적 목표가 되어야 더 강한 나라, 미래가 있는 나라가 될 수 있다는 뜻의 의미를 담고 있습니다. 가자 과학기술 강국으로라는 캐치프레이즈를 내건 스트롱 코리아는 그동안 몇 가지 실질적인 성과를 거두었습니다. 정부와 기업, 학계 등 각계의 깊은 공감과 참여를 이끌어냈고 2004년 국가과학기술 경쟁력 강화를 위한 이공계 특별법이 제정되는 데 크게 기여를 했습니다. 2011년에는 과학기술 인재 10만 명 키우자는 2차 캠페인을 진행하면서 한국이 명실상부한 과학기술 5대 강국으로 진입하기 위해서는 창의성으로 무장한 최정의 인재를 육성해야 한다는 방안을 제시했습니다. 지난해에는 박근혜 정부 출범에 맞춰 세 번째 캠페인을 벌였습니다. 창조경제의 모범국인 이스라엘을 찾아 청년 창업이 활발한 비결을 심도 있게 분석했고 국가과학기술위원회와 공동으로 출연 연구기관의 글로벌 경쟁력도 점검했습니다. 작년 6월 캠페인 결산 행사로 스트롱코리아 창조포럼에서는 열린 스트롱코리아 창조포럼 행사에서는 기존 교육과정과는 별도로 대학 내 창업 트랙 신설을 제안한 대한민국 비전 2020 전략을 제시한 바 있습니다. 저희 한국경제신문은 이 같은 성과를 바탕으로 올해는 창조포럼의 주제를 창의 인재를 키우자로 정했습니다. 박근혜 정부의 최우선 국정과제인 창조경제를 실현하는 데 있어 가장 중요한 요소는 바로 사람이기 때문입니다. 상상력이 뛰어나고 도전정신이 넘치는 인재가 늘어나지 않으면 창조경제로의 패러다임 전환도 어렵습니다. 창의 인재 육성이야말로 정부가 추구하는 창조경제 구현을 위한 가장 시급하고도 실질적인 정책 과제라고 생각합니다. 여러분께서도 잘 아시다시피 최근 우리 경제를 둘러싼 글로벌 환경은 결코 녹록지가 않습니다. 중국 경제의 성장 둔화, 미국의 양적 완화 축소, 일본의 엔저 공세 등에 따른 불확실성으로 한 치 앞을 내다보기 어려운 상황에 처해 있습니다. 과학기술 개발과 인재 양성은 우리 경제가 처한 이 같은 어려움을 극복하기 위한 필수 전략일 것입니다. 한때 어려움을 겪었던 미국의 경제가 애플의 스티브 잡스, 페이스북의 저커버그, 구글의 레리 페이지 같은 IT 분야 인재의 등장으로 다시 역동성을 되찾은 것은 우리에게 시사하는 바가 매우 크다고 할 것입니다. 모쪼록 오늘 포럼에 참석해 주신 국내외 석학과 전문가분들께서 창조경제 실천 방안과 과학기술 발전을 위한 다양한 정책 대안을 제시해 주셨으면 합니다. 저희 신문도 오늘 이 자리에서 나오는 여러 정책 아이디어들을 발전시켜 국가 정책에 반영될 수 있도록 최선의 노력을 다하겠습니다. 다시 한번 이 자리를 빛내주신 여러분들께 감사의 인사를 드리며 가정과 하시는 일에 늘 건강과 행복이 함께 하시기를 기원 드립니다. 대단히 감사합니다.
네, 김기훈 사장님 말씀 감사합니다. 네, 다음은 이번 포럼을 함께 준비한 한국연구재단 정민근 이사장님의 환영사가 있겠습니다. 정민근 이사장님을 단상으로 모시겠습니다.
안녕하십니까. 한국연구재단 이사장 정민근입니다. 먼저 바쁘신 중에도 스트롱 코리아에 참석해 주신 내외인 여러분들께 환영과 감사의 말씀을 먼저 드립니다. 특히 오늘 자리를 빛내주신 미래창조과학부 윤정록 차관님과 한국경제신문 김기훈 사장님께 마음 깊이 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 지난해 새 정부의 출범과 함께 경제정책의 핵심으로 자리 잡은 창조경제의 지속적인 발전과 국민 행복 시대를 만들어가기 위한 오늘 이 포럼에서 환영의 인사를 드리게 되어 무척 기쁘고 영광스럽게 생각합니다. 창조경제는 우리나라에서 한계에 직면하고 있는 기존 대량 생산을 통한 가격 경쟁력 주도의 추격형 전략 대신에 과학기술의 활용과 융합, 소프트웨어에 중점을 둔 새로운 경제성장 모델로 제시되고 있습니다. 창조경제는 인터넷을 기반으로 하는 개방형 생태계를 형성하게 됨으로써 개발과 생산, 판매에 이르기까지 소요되는 비용이 절감되므로 시장에 대한 진입 장벽을 획기적으로 완화시킬 수 있습니다. 이미 우리 사회 구석구석 자리를 잡아가고 있는 1인 창조 기업과 같은 다양한 형태의 창업과 새로운 시도가 활성화될 수 있으며 이는 노동과 자본이 투입되신 아이디어 창의성과 같은 인적 자원이 경제 성장의 주요 원천이 된다는 것을 의미합니다. 우리나라의 기업 생태계 또한 큰 변화의 기로에 놓여 있습니다. 기업 단위가 아닌 플랫폼을 기반으로 하여 생산이 이루어지면서 기업 간 개방적이고 수평적인 네트워크를 형성하게 되고 다양한 업종의 기업 간 협력이 확대되면서 수익 창출을 위한 지식재산권 보유가 중요해지고 있습니다. 그리고 무엇보다도 이러한 지식자산을 창출해내는 창의적 인력의 확보가 더욱 중요한 순간을 맞고 있습니다. 창의 인재는 우리 경제의 패러다임을 추격형 경제에서 선도형 경제로 성장의 패러다임을 전환시킬 수 있는 핵심 역량입니다. 실패를 두려워하지 않고 다양한 시도와 노력을 거듭할 수 있는 창의 인재 육성을 위한 환경 조성에 필요한 부분이 무엇인지 고민해야 합니다. 먼저 학계와 산업계 등 다양한 분야에서 창의 인재에 대해 요구되는 능력과 덕목을 반영한 교육 환경의 조성이 필요합니다. 아울러 생애 주기별 교육 실태와 교수법에 대한 면밀한 고찰을 통해 창의적인 인재가 육성될 수 있는 교육 내용과의 자연스러운 연계가 이루어져야 합니다. 또한 사회에 진출하여 각자의 위치에서 맡은 바 소임을 다하고 있는 젊은 인재들이 직무 수행을 위한 교육뿐만 아니라 세계적 변화의 흐름과 사회적 이슈에 대해 열린 눈과 마음으로 학습을 지속할 수 있는 다양한 노력을 고민해야 하겠습니다. 궁극적으로 이러한 환경 속에서 성장한 인력들이 다음 세대를 이끌어가는 리더로 성장할 수 있을 때 우리는 창조 경제의 지속적인 발전과 정착을 기대할 수 있을 것입니다. 한국연구재단은 올해 약 3조 7천억 원의 예산 가운데 기초연구진흥을 포함한 연구개발 관련 인력 양성에 약 1조 6천억 원을 지원할 예정입니다. 아울러 도전적이고 과감한 시도를 하는 연구자들이 이러한 지원을 통해서 우리나라를 이끌어가는 창의 인재로 거듭날 수 있도록 지속적인 관심을 기울이겠습니다. 사회 각계에서 요구되고 있는 창의 인재가 가져야 될 요건이 무엇인지 다시 한번 돌아보고 심도 깊은 논의가 필요한 시점입니다. 아무쪼록 이번 포럼에서 창의 인재를 키울 수 있는 해법을 찾아가시기 바라며 다시 한번 이 자리에 내빈 여러분과 함께하게 된 것을 매우 기쁘게 생각합니다. 끝으로 본행사를 준비하느라 수고하신 여러 관계자분들의 노고에 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 감사합니다.
네, 임 사장님 말씀 감사합니다. 네, 다음은 이번 포럼의 공동 주최기관인 미래창조과학부 윤종록 차관님의 인사말 순서입니다. 참석 예정이던 최문기 장관께서는 다른 국정 일정 때문에 참석하지 못하신 점 참가자 여러분의 양해를 구하겠습니다.
여러분 반갑습니다. 방금 소개된 미래창조과학부 윤종록입니다. 저희 장관께서 오늘 국회 대정부 경제 분야 질문이 있으셔서 이 자리에 제가 대신 참석하게 됐습니다. 오늘 스트롱코리아 창조포럼 2014에서 이렇게 인사를 드리게 돼서 기쁘게 생각합니다. 먼저 바쁜 일정에도 이 자리를 빛내기 위해 참석해 주신 각 기관의 대표님, 그리고 이처럼 뜻깊은 행사를 준비해 주신 한국경제 김기웅 사장님과 관계자 여러분께 진심으로 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 또한 해외에서 먼 길을 마다 않고 방문해 주신 벨킨 캔버스사의 케빈 애쉬턴 매니저님께도 따뜻한 환영의 말씀을 전합니다. 여러분, 요즘 유행이죠? 뭐뭐뭐는 네모다, 과학기술은 네모다 라고 제가 얘기했을 때 여러분, 그 네모에 어떤 단어가 들어가는 게 가장 적절할까요? 아마 여러분 머릿속에 많은 단어들이 떠오르고 있을 것입니다. 저는 이 순간 과학기술은 이제 경제다 라고 감히 부르짖고 싶습니다. 자원이 없는 나라가 21세기를 헤쳐가는 방법은 저는 두 가지가 있다고 봅니다. 하나는 값싼 노동력을 이용해서 부지런히 손발을 움직이는 것, 자원이 없는 나라가 서바이브하는 길의 하나입니다. 그러나 우리나라의 노동력의 경쟁력은 이미 상실했습니다. 이제 마지막 남은 한 가지가 뭔가라고 본다면 이제는 값싼 노동력을 부지런하게 움직이는 팔다리가 아니라 머리에 창의력을 발휘하는 것, 저는 이게 창조 경제가 아닐까 이렇게 생각합니다. 제가 바로 일주일 전에 한국에 와 있는 이스라엘 대사와 저녁 식사를 할 기회가 있었습니다. 그 대사가 저한테 퀴즈를 하나 냈습니다. 바닷물 1톤을 민물로 바꾸는데 드는 에너지 비용이 얼마나 들까요? 라고 저한테 질문을 했습니다. 1번 100불 이상, 2번 50불 이상, 10불 이상, 1불 이상, 1불 이하. 여러분 답이 얼마라고 생각하십니까? 네, 이스라엘 대사께서 98센트까지 내려왔다고 그러더라고요. 98센트의 전기 에너지면은 바닷물 1톤을 민물로 만들어버릴 수 있다. 이 나라는 1년에 강우량이 400ml밖에 안 되지만은 지중해에 있는 물을 에너지비 1불 이하 98센트당 바닷물 1톤을 민물로 바꿔버리는 이런 기술을 개발해서 이제 사막도 바다만 연해 있다면 원자력을 통해서 더 이상 사막이 아니다 이렇게 얘기를 합니다. 지금 우리 사회는 이러한 과학기술을 이용해서 자원은 없지만은 21세기를 여발한 듯이 잘 이끌어 나가는 나라들이 많이 있습니다. 우리나라의 경우는 특별히 우리가 발로 딛고 있는 지구 이외에 또 하나의 지구, 디지털로 이루어진 디지털 플래닛이 존재한다고 저는 생각합니다. 세계에서 가장 비옥한 디지털 지구를 가지고 있는 나라가 우리나라다. 현재 이 디지털 지구에서 여러 가지 변화가 일어나고 있습니다. 그동안에 인터넷 하면은 사람만 인터넷을 이용하는 줄 알았는데 이제는 사람은 물론이고 우리가 가지고 있는 모든 물건이 인터넷과 연결되는 초연결 사회로 급속히 바뀌고 있는 부분, 이것도 큰 변화 중에 하나입니다. 지난 10년이 사람이 직접 인터넷을 이용하는 시대였다면 이제는 앞으로의 10년은 사람 사물 모든 것이 연결되는, 그래서 정보를 생산, 공유, 활용하는 사물 인터넷 기반 새로운 시대가 전개돼 나가고 거기에서 다양한 부가가치를 만들게 될 것입니다. 사물 인터넷은 도시 공간 등을 연결해서 공공 서비스를 혁신하고 또 제조, 유통, 물류 여기에 활용되면 또 산업의 효율성이 획기적으로 늘어나게 되겠습니다. 또 개인의 기기나 옷 이런 부분이 또 연결되게 되면 생활의 편리함이 배가 되겠습니다. 새로운 산업 창출과 기업의 생산성 제고는 물론이고 사회 문제 해결과 국민의 질 향상에 크게 기여하는 창조경제의 핵심으로 IT 기술이 한 번 더 거듭나고 있는 순간이다. 이러한 관점에서 잠시 후에 있을 케빈 애시턴 매니저님의 통찰력 있는 강연이 기대가 되기도 합니다. 여러분, 새로운 융합시대의 핵심에는 항상 소프트웨어가 그 자리에 함께하고 있습니다. 소프트웨어는 전자, 자동차 등 제조뿐만 아니라 컨텐츠나 기초과학 등 다양한 분야와 융합하게 되면 기존 산업을 고도화시키고 새로운 서비스를 창출하는 중요한 수단이 되고 있습니다. 여러분 잘 아시다시피 작년도 노벨 화학상의 주역이 화학이 아니라 소프트웨어였습니다. 그들이 주장한 그 수상자들이 개발한 다중척도 모델링, 이거는 단백질의 아주 복잡한 화학 반응을 이해하고 분자 조합을 예측하기 위한 컴퓨터 시뮬레이션이었습니다. 과거 노벨 화학상에서 공로를 인정받던 분야와는 다르게 소프트웨어를 이용해서 논리적인 사고로 문제를 해결하고 새로운 것을 만들어내는 것, 이게 작년의 노벨 화학상의 수상 주제였습니다. 산업혁명의 시기에는 물리화학 이런 과학 수준이 각 나라의 경쟁력을 결정지었다면 이제 디지털 경제, 지금은 자신의 생각과 아이디어, 이미지네이션을 소프트웨어로 구현할 수 있는 능력, 이게 국가 경쟁력을 결정짓는다. 저는 이렇게 생각합니다. 이 때문에 미국, 영국, 중국, 이스라엘 주요 국가들은 미래 경쟁력 선점을 위해서 초, 중, 고등학교에서 소프트웨어 교육을 강화하고 있습니다. 더 늦기 전에 우리도 어린 학생들이 학교에서 즐겁게 소프트웨어를 배울 수 있는 환경을 조성해 나가야 됩니다. 이를 위해서 저희 미래부는 초, 중, 고등학교에서 소프트웨어 교육을 강화하는 방안을 교육부와 협의 중에 있습니다. 이와 더불어 창의적 융합 인재를 양성하는 대학의 역할도 새로운 모습으로 요구되고 있습니다. 특히 공과대학은 그간 우리 산업의 발전을 이끌어온 중추적인 역할을 수행해 왔습니다. 하지만 기초와 전공 지식의 부족, 실무 역량의 미흡 등 배출된 학생들에 대한 산업계의 불만이 지속적으로 제기되고 있으며 대학의 연구 성과 또한 실험실 안에 갇혀서 나오지 못하고 있습니다. 이런 대학의 모습에는 SCI 중심의 평가 시스템이 자리 잡고 있습니다. SCI 중심의 재정사업 및 대학 평가는 그간 우리 대학의 연구 역량을 올려놓는데 크게 기여하였습니다. 하지만 지금의 대학 교육과 연구 활동은 산업 현장의 요구와 괴리되는 결과를 초래하고 있습니다. 따라서 창조경제시대 공과대학은 SCI 논문 중심에서 벗어나 산업 현장과 유기적인 관계를 맺어야 합니다. 산업계와 일체된 교육과 연구가 바로 우리 경제를 이끌어 나갈 수 있으며 새로운 일자리를 창출할 수 있다고 확신합니다. 바로 이 중심에 공과대학이 있으며 공과대학이 변해야만 하는 이유이기도 합니다. 오늘 이 자리는 앞서 말씀드린 이 시대의 중요한 변화를 함께 고민하는 뜻깊은 자리입니다. 아무쪼록 한국 경제가 힘차게 도약하는데 큰 밑거름이 될 수 있도록 의미 있는 토론을 부탁드립니다. 다시 한번 귀한 시간을 내어 참석해 주신 모든 분들께 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 감사합니다.
네, 차관님 귀한 시간 내주셔서 감사합니다. 말씀 잘 들었습니다. 네, 이어지는 순서는 축사의 순서입니다. 박근혜 대통령께서 직접 보내오신 축하 영상 메시지를 지금부터 함께 보시도록 하겠습니다.
스트롱 코리아 창조포럼 2014 개최를 축하합니다. 지난 2002년부터 스트롱 코리아 캠페인을 펼치면서 과학기술 강국 만들기와 창의 인재 육성에 기여해온 한국경제신문의 노력에 감사드립니다. 자원이 없는 우리나라가 과학기술에 투자해 한강의 기적을 낳았듯이 ICT를 비롯한 첨단 기술의 발전과 확산은 우리 경제의 재도약을 이끌어갈 핵심적인 열쇠입니다. 기술 혁신과 창조적 아이디어는 개방적이고 융합적인 사고에서 탄생한다는 점에서 창의 인재를 키우자라는 이번 포럼의 주제는 매우 시적절하다고 생각합니다. 지금 정부는 과학기술을 기반으로 한 창조 경제를 통해 새로운 경제 발전 패러다임을 만들기 위해 노력하고 있습니다. 우리 아이들이 보다 창의적으로 성장할 수 있도록 교육을 바꾸는 일에 노력을 기울이고 있고 공과대학을 중심으로 대학 교육도 개혁해 나가고 있습니다. 정부와 기업, 사회 각 분야 리더들이 지혜를 모으는 오늘 포럼을 통해 창의 인재 육성 방안이 많이 제시되기를 기대합니다. 창조 경제의 미래를 밝히고 경제 대도약의 새로운 길을 여는데 모두 함께 노력해 주실 것을 부탁드립니다.
네, 영상 함께 하셨습니다. 이 창조경제 실현을 위한 창의적 인재 양성의 중요성을 강조하고 정부와 민간이 함께 손잡고 준비한 본 포럼의 개최를 격려하는 메시지를 보내주신 박근혜 대통령님께 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 자, 그럼 이것으로 스트롱 코리아 창조포럼 2014 개회식의 모든 순서를 마치도록 하겠습니다. 네, 올해의 기조연설은 사물 인터넷의 창시자인 케빈 애슈턴 벨킨 청정기술부문 사장께서 이 사물 인터넷 시대의 창의 인재를 주제로 강연해 주시겠습니다. 진행과 대담에는 카이스트 강성모 총장님께서 수고해 주시겠습니다. 그럼 두 분을 이제 단상으로 모시도록 하겠습니다.
네, 카이스트의 강성모 총장입니다. 오늘 이렇게 훌륭한 미팅에 초청해 주셔서 감사하고요. 특히 미국에서 케빈 애슈턴이 주재 연사로 여러분께 발표를 해 주시겠습니다. 말씀이 끝난 후에 저하고 대담을 나누는 걸로 하겠습니다. So with that brief introduction, would you please come forward and then give a presentation? Let us welcome Kevin Ashton.
Thank you. Everybody smile now. I'm going to put this on Twitter later on this morning, so if you're not paying attention, everybody will know. Smile now. So, I will put that on Twitter. I'm teasing a little bit. But I just did something that maybe 10 years ago would have seemed quite miraculous. I took this tiny wireless device out of my pocket and took a photograph of everybody here in Seoul, and in a matter of moments I can share it with the world. And that's something we're very used to today, but we were completely unused to maybe even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago. So one of the things I would like to have you keep in mind as we talk this morning is not just how quickly things change, but how quickly we adapt to the fact that things have changed. The future, as I hope to show you, is actually very predictable, at least with respect to information computing technology. The part that is hard is not predicting the future. The part that is hard is believing it. So as we talk this morning, please remember all the changes you have seen in the last few years in your lifetime, both in the world and in Korea. I love Korea. I come here regularly. It's always great to be here. One of the things as a foreigner that I notice is to the rest of the world, Korea is this amazing economic miracle. And whenever I come here, you're all very humble and modest about what you have achieved together. So sort of from the rest of the world to you, if I may, there's so much to be amazed about here in Korea, and I think there will be even more to be amazed about in the future. And the area that I'd like to talk about this morning is the Internet of Things, which has already been mentioned in a very excellent speech by the Vice Minister. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. This picture on my first slide here with Seoul kind of in the middle there, this is one of the oldest networks in the world. This shows all the major shipping lanes on the planet. So when we think about networks, we tend to think about computer networks, but what you're actually looking at here is much older and much more important, and this is the movement of things around the world. This is what global trade actually looks like. So you have these oceans that are really covered in ships moving goods around, and what is in those ships is occasionally raw materials, but normally things that people have added creativity and therefore value to. It's a really amazing thing. In contrast, this is what the internet looks like. Each dot on this heat map is a cluster of active IP addresses. And again, you can look at this for a long time, and it's kind of interesting to see, for example, India now has not a massively intense amount of internet activity, but a very broadly distributed amount of internet activity, which is amazing to me because when I first visited India in 1990, it was difficult to even place a phone call, and there were regular blackouts. And obviously Korea is very bright on this map, and so is Western Europe, and so on. Now, we have these two networks. We had these two networks. There's this network of trade and this network of computers. And the interesting thing is, if we try to overlay them a little bit, what you notice is all the trade activity is happening in the oceans and all the internet activity is happening in the land. And that's because obviously ships can't travel on land and there aren't many internet addresses in the sea. But what this also symbolizes is the fact that until recently, the network of trade, our network of things, and the internet of information and data and people communicating with one another were very separate. And what the Internet of Things does is take kind of reality and the internet, which has traditionally been about abstract data, and brings them together. So when we talk about the Internet of Things, we're not just talking about smartphones that happen to be on the internet. It's really not the Internet of Things when I send a text message to a friend. That's kind of just the internet. It happens to be small and in my pocket. The Internet of Things is when we have computers that can sense the real world for themselves and by themselves, and therefore information about the things in the world can be made available via the internet automatically. So the difference between what some people call ubiquitous computing or embedded computing and the Internet of Things is this additional layer of sensing. And that's really important because if the internet stopped working today, it would be inconvenient. If the global shipping lanes stopped working today, we would all die. You can't eat bits. You can't drink bits. You can't put bits in the gas tank of your car. So we're dependent on things to survive, and having better information about our things is a better way to survive. So that's what the Internet of Things is all about. Now, I said everything is very predictable, and I want to sort of show you why a little bit. And this is predictable in a familiar way. I'm really not going to tell you anything you don't know right now. When computing got started around the 1950s, computers were big. And then a few decades later, they became small enough to put in our homes. And then a few decades after that, they became small enough that we could put them in our briefcases. So computers get smaller. We know this. And this carried on into the 21st century. We went from computers in briefcases to computers in pockets. And now we have computers on eyeglasses and that you can wear and that can potentially sort of become part of your body. And this is where we are today. So when we ask ourselves what's next, it's really not hard to predict. Computers are going to keep getting smaller. Now, how much smaller can you get when you've got something as small as Google Glass here? Well, computers are basically going to become invisible. That's really nothing controversial. That's a fairly boring, safe prediction. It would be harder to predict how Korea is going to do in the World Cup after their fantastic 1-1 draw yesterday. That's a harder prediction to make than this one. And what's driving that, this is very familiar. This is Moore's law, which basically says the number of transistors on an integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years. Now, if you imagine we could turn this chart kind of the other way around, because what this is showing is computers getting more complicated in the same amount of space. But it's also true that you can make the same amount of computing smaller every 2 years. And this is part of what's driving this trend towards invisible computers. Now, there's another law which is probably more important for the 21st century and probably more important for the Internet of Things, which is less well known, and that is Kuhme's law. Now, what Kuhme's law says is the amount of energy, electrical energy, needed to perform a computation halves every 1.5 years. And this is the reason that your smartphone today has better battery life than your smartphone 5 years ago. It is not because battery technology has improved. It has, but that's really a small part of the reason. The main reason we get better battery life from our devices today is Kuhme's law. It's partly related to Moore's law, but the amount of energy we need to do computation is dropping rapidly. And note, the amount of energy needed to do computation drops faster than Moore's law predicts computers will get smaller. So this is not just because smaller computers use less energy. There are other factors at play here. And so again, we can turn this upside down. What this chart shows us is computations per kilowatt hour get greater and greater over time, but you can turn it around and say the amount of energy needed to do one computation drops rapidly. And this is one of the sort of secret driving forces behind the Internet of Things. You don't have to put batteries into these tiny computers anymore. So one of the first Internet of Things technologies is RFID, or radio frequency identification. And one of the interesting things about RFID is it's a microchip. An RFID tag is a microchip with an antenna and no battery. Where does the energy come from? The energy comes from the radio wave that is talking to the microchip. That chip needs so little energy because of Kuhm's law that we can turn it on and off simply by communicating with it. So the other prediction we can make is, in addition to computers becoming invisible, a lot of computers will not need any apparent electricity whatsoever. They will get their energy from the radio waves communicating with them. They will get their energy from ambient light. They will harvest their energy from vibrations in the air. So if you think back to the computer of the 1950s, this big thing in a room that needed lots and lots of electricity, now that becomes an invisible device that needs no electricity at all, or at least no dedicated internal electricity. And that is the most boring prediction any technologist can make. That is as certain as anything will ever be about the future. We are moving quickly to an age of invisible computers without batteries. So to summarize, I can pretty much promise you that over the next few years, computers are going to get smaller. They're going to become more energy efficient. They're going to be networked because everything is networked now. That kind of goes without saying. And they're going to contain sensors. And when I say sensors, I do not mean sensors like keyboards or other devices that you use so you can communicate with your computer. I mean sensors that enable the machine to understand the world around it in some way by itself. And those two trends have also been happening over the last few years and are also really easy predictions to make. The first one, networking, even if we look at that laptop photograph from the 1990s, after the mid-1990s, it was very unlikely that you were going to buy a computer that didn't go on the network somehow. There was a little bit of time when you went and bought a separate modem or a separate modem card, but now this is just built in and we just expect it to be there. So networking is an easy prediction. And sensing as well. If you look at what happened with smartphones and what is now happening with wearable computing, we expect sensors to be built in. They may be fairly basic. It's a camera in your smartphone. It's some GPS sensing. There's an accelerometer in your smartphone. Some of them kind of know what temperature it is. But they're becoming sensor platforms. And as we move to wearable computing, that will be more true. So again, this is all very easy to predict. Maybe hard to believe, but it's easy to predict. And really just to emphasize and underline this point before we move on to what do you need to do to get ready, this shows the remarkable growth in smartphone shipments over the last few years. Billions and billions of smartphones have been sold. That's not very surprising. But when people ask me, will the Internet of Things be real? Is the Internet of Things real? When will the Internet of Things be real? This is the simple answer that I often give them. Every year for the last 3 years, we have shipped 1 billion more RFID tags than smartphones. So asking, an RFID is just one example of an Internet of Things technology. So asking whether the Internet of Things is real or will happen makes as much sense to me as asking whether smartphones will become popular. The big difference is you can see smartphones. I just took a picture of you with my smartphone. You all know I own a smartphone. Some of you are sending emails and text messages right now. I can see you have smartphones. RFID tags are kind of invisible. And that's an interesting caution, by the way, as we move to the future. Some companies, some nations are going to get left behind simply because the Internet of Things is invisible. So don't be fooled by the fact that you see smartphones everywhere or video games everywhere, but you don't see the Internet of Things everywhere. The reason you don't see it is because it is so small. If you look closely, you will find it. So a few examples of where we are right now, and really this is to explain what we need to do next. So this is a technology I developed when I worked at Belkin, which is an electronics technology company in Los Angeles. We did this a few years ago. This is a technology called Wemo, W-E-M-O. You can buy this product in various retailers around the world. It is very simple. It allows you to control your electrical outlets using your smartphone. So the product on one side, it's just a wirelessly controlled electrical outfit. You plug in a lamp or something, and then you can turn the lamp on and off using your phone. You can program the outlet to come on and off at certain times. The product on the other side is a motion sensor. You plug it into your outlet. If somebody walks by the outlet, the motion sensor detects that. Those two products alone enable you to do very interesting things. You can have the lights come on when you walk into the room. You can see whether somebody is going into a place that they're not supposed to go into. You could connect that to a camera and take a photograph of them. The application that saved my life when I invented this technology was actually, I have young children and they like to play video games and watch the television, and when they're bored with that, they leave the room and they leave everything on. And it used to drive me crazy. And now everything is plugged in to an outlet, and if there is no motion in the room after a few minutes, the outlet shuts down. This has two advantages. First of all, it means all the electronics get turned off when they leave. Secondly, it means they have to get up once in a while and move around, otherwise they know everything's going to get turned off. Very simple, very basic. It's like $50 US. The app is free. Very simple. Now, hundreds of thousands of these have been sold. This is probably one of the most widely used home automation systems in the world. Enormously popular, very simple. And it started, this is a photograph of the actual whiteboard where I first had the idea to do Wemo. This is from 2011. Don't worry if you can't read the handwriting. I can't read the handwriting either. I sort of remember what I was saying, but it all happened very quickly. But one of the design decisions here is actually around standards. How do you have the phone communicate with the motion sensor? And there are all these different wireless standards that people like. And the decision I made, and I think probably the most important decision I made, was we were going to use Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is not the best way to communicate with the Internet of Things, except for the fact that everybody already has it. And so one of the things when we think about standards, just as an aside, is if you can use the thing you've already got, that's the thing you should use. And if there's some other new thing that's better, it has to be many orders of magnitude better to overcome the fact that nobody has it. If you can use, for example, Wi-Fi or the cell phone network or something that's already ubiquitous, much better. But that's a very, very simple example of an Internet of Things technology. And the system has now grown. We started with the motion sensor and the outlet, and now this is a Wemo light bulb. You can turn your lights on and off from your phone. You can use the light bulb as a kind of a communications node in the network to extend your Wi-Fi and various other things. There's light switches, there's baby monitors and cameras, and it's a system. And people do amazing things with it. This is another example. This is a very simple product called Linquet, Linquet, which it's from a startup. It's just a little Bluetooth alarm that you put on your purse or in your wallet or on your car keys. And if you get too far away from your cell phone makes a noise. And if you can't find your keys, you push a button on an app on your cell phone and the alarm rings and you find your keys again. This is trivial, very useful. Every once in a while I can't find my keys and I use this and I love it. But with Kumi's law bringing energy requirements down and Moore's law bringing computing size down, this is trivial. And we will look back at this in a few years and laugh because it's so big. Soon this will be just a tiny thing that you can barely see. And another example of the Internet of Things in action, and I think this is an important product and an important concept to be aware of. This is the Nest thermostat. It's an intelligent networked thermostat. It has sensors that sense more than just temperature built into it. Nest Labs was a startup about 3 or 4 years ago. A few months ago, they were acquired by Google for $3.2 billion. So far, they have 2 products, and they haven't sold that many of them. They have a thermostat and a carbon monoxide smoke detector. But the significant thing about this, I think, is Google. I do a lot of work with big technology companies. I get asked about big technology companies. And another thing that is a fairly safe prediction is big technology companies usually die when new technology happens. There are very few big technology companies that survive transitions in technology. Very few. And so when you look at Apple today, or Cisco today, or Sony today, and you look at what they're doing in the Internet of Things, the answer is nothing much. The exception right now seems to be Google. They actually look to me like they understand what's going on. But there are very few big technology companies that survive technology changes. The Internet of Things will be no different. So when we reconvene in 10 years to talk about how Korea has become an economic powerhouse in the world of the Internet of Things, the companies we are talking about may not be companies we have heard of today. But I think Google may be an interesting exception. And this is the other reason why. Here's another Internet of Things technology. This is the Google self-driving car. And it's a prototype. They've made about 10 so far. But this is a product and a product category that is coming. Google are not the only people working in this space. And I think that, just as the idea of a computer that's not on the internet will seem strange today, I think for our children, the idea of cars that people drive will seem strange. My 8-year-old son asked me if there would ever be cars that you could drive, that you didn't have to drive. And I explained that there was this Google car, and his reaction was, great, that means I can text. For the younger generation, driving does not seem like a fun thing to do. It seems like something that's going to interrupt their texting and their Facebooking and their video games and everything else. They really don't want to have to do it. Now, this is a really nice example of a very advanced Internet of Things technology. This car is loaded with sensors, but the main one is the one you see on the top there. It is a type of sensor called LiDAR, L-I-D-A-R, which is not actually an acronym. It's just a combination of the words light and radar. And this is a visualization of what a LiDAR system sees. And what you notice here is the car is able to sense and detect objects that would not be visible to a human driver. It can see things that are behind other things. And this is part of the power of Internet of Things sensor technology. We are able to sense things using technology that we cannot sense ourselves. So there's a tremendous amount of information available to a sensor system like this. It is very important that it is networked, because by being networked, it has access, first of all, to processing capability that is perhaps too elaborate to actually build into a car, but it can share information with other systems and other vehicles and understand things that it cannot sense directly itself, such as 3 miles down the road there is a traffic jam, it's better to go another way. So, the self-driving car is a very interesting example of a very powerful emerging Internet of Things technology, and this will be profoundly disruptive. I seriously doubt that many of us will be driving our own cars 20 years from now. Furthermore, I seriously doubt that any of us will regret the fact that we are not driving our own cars. We will wonder what on earth we were thinking all those years we spent sitting in traffic jams and trying to avoid people who were bad drivers. Yeah, another area for Internet of Things, this is a little fitness sensor that you can wear on your wrist. There are many of these available right now. So health, and it's called personal quantification sometimes, which is a horrible name. But little sensors you have on your body that help you understand how active you are, whether you've run 5 miles or 4, that kind of thing. Now, I want to use this as an example of where the opportunity is for education and where the opportunity is for the Korean economy, because all that you find in that little wristband there, all that you have is an accelerometer. And all it can do is measure movement in 3 dimensions: up and down, left and right, backwards and forwards. And what this chart shows, each colored line is one of the dimensions. So as you wave your wrist around, the sensor will detect movement in 1, 2, or 3 dimensions. Now, that's it. That's all the sensor will do for you. The problem and the opportunity in the Internet of Things economy is not in building sensors like this. The problem and the opportunity is in building systems that take data like this and figure out automatically what is happening. So what kind of movement is this person running, walking, cycling, sleeping? What is the sensor telling us here? That is the challenge, and that is the opportunity. And this is how data flows in the Internet of Things. We sense things. We transmit that data somewhere. We store it in a database somewhere. We then have to analyze it to understand what it means. And having done that, we then have to send what we conclude to some person or system who can make a difference in the world because of what we've discovered. And the problem with that wrist sensor and understanding, is that person waving or weightlifting? That is this analysis problem. And this is really one of the 2 golden opportunities in the Internet of Things economy. And this is where I would direct my children, and this is where I would direct my economy. And I'll give you a quick example. This is real sensor data from a product I developed. This is energy consumption in a home in Illinois, one Saturday. We put 3 sensors into this home. The sensor that's generating that colored heat map in the background is actually sensing voltage noise in the home. Every time you turn something on or off in your home, it sends a little kind of noise onto your electrical circuit in the voltage domain. And we are sensing voltage here millions of times a second over a very broad frequency band. So that's the colored part. It shows you when the voltage noise occurred, how loud it was, and what wavelength it was at. The purple zigzag line there, that's just how much energy the home is consuming in total, although we measure that tens of thousands of times a second. And then the red dotted line is the ambient temperature in the neighborhood. So this is a classic problem in Internet of Things analysis. We have 3 sensors. The things they are sensing are really a proxy for human behavior. What is going on in the home? And keep in mind, it's not enough to look at this visualization and have a human being understand what is going on in the home. We have to write algorithms that can automatically figure out what is going on in the home. That's the problem. And analyzing data like this on a massive scale, accurately, in real time, all the time, that is the big frontier in the Internet of Things today. Now, just to give you an example, just by looking at this, we can figure out a few things. It's a Saturday. You'll see that the activity between midnight and 9 a.m. is pretty steady. The power consumption in the home kind of goes up and down, but it's a fairly steady state. The ambient temperature outside the home stays about the same, and there's very little going on in the heat map. This family are asleep. The spiking of the power consumption is the refrigerator cycling. Actually, they have more than one refrigerator, and so the spikes are a little irregular. The little decrease in energy consumption you see between about 7:30 and 9 o'clock, well, that coincides with the temperature outside rising. So I can tell you this home has heating set on a thermostat. When it gets warmer outside, the amount of energy they need to keep the temperature in the home constant goes down. And then what time did they wake up? Well, that's not hard. You don't need to know very much about the system at all to guess that they woke up around 9 o'clock. Because the power consumption spikes. Suddenly the heat map gets very busy. They're turning on their electronic devices. That spike in power consumption is probably someone making toast or a cup of coffee. One of the interesting things, we've got a lot of homes installed with these systems, is people tend to wake up at very precise times because they have alarm clocks. So this home almost certainly had an alarm clock set for 9 o'clock. You know, and they stayed awake past midnight. If you look right at the other end, the 23 and 24 end of the scale, a lot of activity. And again, as the temperature outside goes down, the energy consumption goes up. So the challenge is to build an automated system that looks at this kind of data and makes these kind of conclusions and does it very accurately. So when I talk about the analysis problem, that really takes you to this point. So we built an automated system that took that data and broke it down into, well, what are the devices consuming the energy? So this is the kind of conclusion that automatic analysis can draw for you. And this is very nice, but the problem still is, what do you do with it? You show a chart like this to the average homeowner, and they might find it interesting the first time, maybe, but they don't do anything differently. So what if you want them to save energy? That takes me to the other area of opportunity, which we don't have a word for today really, but I've called it present. It's how do you share the information either with a machine or with a person in such a way that something happens in the world that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Because if nothing changes, there is no point. We've done a lot of work in trying to understand how to give a regular person who is very busy the right information based on the sensor data to have them get some benefit, to have them reduce their electricity bill in this case. And the conclusions we have so far are that you don't want to give them very much information. So all that data that I just showed you, and that was just one day's worth, we take a month of that, we do all that analysis, and we identify the one thing that they can do to have the biggest impact on their electric bill, and then we try and show them that information in a way that is motivating. So this is another thing to watch out for with the Internet of Things. You are generating a tremendous amount of data. You are doing lots of very advanced analysis to draw lots of very rich conclusions, and then you have to take it all the way back down and simplify it to one or two simple actions. And that's true whether you're communicating with a human being looking to save electricity, or whether you are the Google smart car deciding whether to stop or go. At the end of the day, all that data gets boiled down into something very simple. Now, the interesting thing about these two areas, this analyze area and this present area, is you don't need lots of land. You don't need access to fast-flowing rivers. It doesn't matter what kind of vegetables you can grow. All that matters is you have a computer and access to the internet, and possibly, if you're doing research on how to present information to human beings, some people that you can study. So to win in this area, you need to be a nation that has internet access, computers, and people. And that is all. So this is an opportunity for the whole world. This is not an opportunity that has to be clustered in a particular area with particular geographic advantages. The people who win in this space will be the people with the most ingenious brains, which is lovely. The whole world can compete. Now, just briefly, before we have a discussion, some comments about education, and particularly education in the age of the Internet of Things. You really don't want to teach your children the thing that would have been useful for them to know yesterday. You don't want to teach your children the thing it would be useful for them to know today. We need to teach our children the things they will need tomorrow. And as I hope I've just shown you, tomorrow is very predictable when it comes to information technology. So, to me, it is obvious that you want to prepare the next generation of entrepreneurs and Nobel Prize winners and workers and PhDs for this analyze problem and this present problem. Because the people who have the best solutions to those problems are going to rule the world. This analysis problem is not just math. One of the interesting things about math education is that it has not changed for centuries, and it is based on Isaac Newton and classical physics. We learn simple equations in linear systems, very steady variables. There's generally one right answer. If you want to do the kind of data science that you need to analyze data like that electricity data I just showed you, that doesn't work. You need to understand how to build algorithms. Algorithms are like equations, but they have ifs, and they have thens, and they have buts in them. There's something we sometimes call Boolean algebra. Another thing that is incredibly important, which is practically untaught today, is the mathematics of probability. In the age of the Internet of Things, there is not one right answer, there is the most probable answer. And that's something we call Bayesian analysis. And I can't emphasize enough that data science and machine learning is not the same as programming. There is a lot of interest in countries around the world and how do they educate their children in coding and programming. And I'm here to tell you that I think coding and programming is the thing you wanted to teach your kids yesterday. Data science is the thing you want to teach your kids for tomorrow. And they're not the same. And then in terms of presentation, there are really two things. You may be presenting information to human beings. Getting this right is also very powerful. And I think there are aspects of psychology, there are aspects of design, there's understand how people using systems think, sort of operations science, if you will, how to write things clearly. And above all, another thing I think we don't teach very well today is how to make things simple. A lot of educators prize complexity. The longer essay is better, for example. And I think understanding the science of simplicity will be very powerful when we come to present data to human beings. It will also be very powerful when we do the other thing that we need to know how to do, which is how to present data to machines, robots, and so on. And this is just a whole other set of disciplines. Robotics involves mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. There's a very interesting field which is resurging right now, which was popular in about the 1950s, which is called cybernetics, kind of this, how information works within systems, complex systems. So those are some of the areas that whether you are teaching pre-teenagers, teenagers, college students, I think these need to be more dominant in the syllabus because these are the skills we will need in the future. If we get it right, these shipping lanes will not just be carrying physical goods. They will be carrying human ideas. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Kevin. So we have about 15 minutes left for our dialogue, and I'd like to thank you again on behalf of a big audience for your excellent talk. You even highlighted the importance of education and what to educate, including Bayesian statistics and analytics and putting more focus on the future rather than the past. So I think the main theme of today's conference is how do we educate our future workforce who can be creative and then bold enough to take big challenges. And you are the role model. In 1999, you coined the word IoT, Internet of Things. So I'd like to ask you, what made you that sort of motivation for you to come up with the Internet of Things, and also at the same time, what has made you creative and bold enough to challenge a lot of things?
So first of all, I think everybody is creative. We don't need to be encouraged to be creative. We need to be discouraged from being creative. And so I've never ever seen a child with a box of crayons who didn't want to make a drawing. We're all born with this urge to create. It's the most human thing I can think of. The thing that distinguishes us from every other species is we like to make things better. One of the interesting things is birds build nests. Well, nests are kind of tools, but the difference is the nest that the bird was building 10,000 years ago is exactly the same as the nest that the bird was building today. That's just instinct. We have a different instinct. We don't only have an instinct to build tools, we have an instinct to keep improving them. And that's all of us. So, for me, the question is not what made me successful at being creative, but why wasn't I inhibited from being creative? And I think I've always had a bit of a problem with arrogance. That's the first thing. I'm not polite enough to not do something because somebody tells me not to do it, which is sometimes a bad thing, but is a good thing in this case. And like most of us, I get annoyed when things don't seem to be working right. And I was led to the idea of the Internet of Things because I had a very mundane job. I was working for Procter & Gamble. I was running a color cosmetics business, so lipstick and eye makeup and stuff. And we had this very popular lipstick color, and I couldn't find it in the stores. And it was selling faster than the stores could put it back on the shelf. But they didn't know. And they didn't know because they didn't have any kind of information system that could sense what was happening in the real world. So my impetus for this whole thing, everything around the Internet of Things would have happened without me. It may have had a different name, I suppose, but this was something that was happening. I just happened to kind of stumble upon it early, but I was kind of frustrated at something that wasn't working well. And that's really I think always the impetus for creative success is you have a problem you really want to solve, and for whatever reason you won't believe people who tell you it can't be solved. The biggest, so if we think of creation as the urge to make things better, the easiest way to discourage that urge is to tell somebody that this is just the way things are. Mm-hmm. That's the force that we are fighting against.
Right. Also, you did mention that big companies can hardly survive technological changes. So what advice would you give to big companies? We have big groups in Korea.
Yes.
Samsung, LG, and in the US, Cisco, and
Yes.
Even Google is now a big company.
Yes.
And how do they survive technological changes? Is that M&A, or what is the key to success?
Wow. So, I mean, the fact is that they typically don't survive. And it's an interesting thing that I think big companies get very comfortable, and often the people who started them aren't the people who finished them. The people change as well. And so, I think and they forget that they started 15, 20 years ago as a small company. Even Samsung or LG or anybody like that, there was a time when there was no Samsung. Mm-hmm. And there was a time when the idea of Samsung was crazy. And there were other companies that were going to be successful, and who was Samsung to think they were going to succeed? So, you have to remember your roots, and you have to be profoundly uncomfortable because the odds are actually against you. That is something that I'm always amazed about when I work with big companies, that they don't, a lot of executives don't have a good sense of history. And history says you are probably not going to survive this technology transition. And the reason you're not going to survive is you're going to be so comfortable and confident that the thing you are doing today is going to help you tomorrow, and so focused on the last 5% of market share in the VHS video cassette market or whatever it is that's actually about to die, that you will fall down. And also, there's a kind of confidence, a false confidence you can have in a big company, that because you were successful yesterday, you'll be successful today, and because you've been at the successful company for 10 years, you know more than the kid that's just arrived from KAIST. Mm-hmm. Right now, there is a big company in Korea, and I promise you there is a graduate from KAIST who has the next big idea on a PowerPoint presentation or something, and they this morning are showing it to their boss, who is telling them no. Mm-hmm. Here are all the reasons why you will fail.
Right.
And that kid is either going to put that presentation away and never think about it again, or hopefully they will go start their own company.
You talk about Moore's law and miniaturization, and my field is integrated circuit, VLSI, and if you look at the history, when Jack Kilby showed that idea to his boss at Texas Instruments, boss said, don't work on it.
Yes.
It wouldn't work.
Yes.
And he went against his boss. And that for Korean culture, maybe no. And we need to encourage young people to gently go against their boss, advice once in a while. What do you think?
I want to. I mean, that's true, and that's. I just wrote a book about this. It's coming out in Korea next year. The English title is How to Fly a Horse. But almost every time you look at a major innovation, if you can uncover the truth, there's a lot of propaganda that gets written about innovations afterwards, but if you can find the truth, you find that story. And the one thing I would like to leave you with is there are many, many things special about Korea, but saying no to good ideas is not especially Korean. That is just human nature. Okay, we are not in a country right now here in Korea where I think there's a lot of mythology around, certain cultures have more hierarchical traditions and it's harder, and maybe in America it's easier, and I just don't see any evidence of that. I think that's an assumption that needs to be challenged, right? There is a tendency everywhere to say no to new ideas, and there's a good reason why. Most new ideas are terrible. Most new ideas are bad, but probably the best way to find out whether they're good or bad is to try them, at least a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And this, maybe, as you said, under the sky, not many things are new. Back in 1928, Nikola Tesla was a great engineer. He predicted that with a wireless connection, the whole world will become like a brain, and everything will be part of a brain with a rhythmic structure and so on. And you earlier talked about the intelligence of all the systems, components, and so on. Recently, I watched a movie. Movie's title is Her, H-E-R. Have you ever watched that movie?
Age? No, I don't think so.
Her.
Oh, Her. Yes, I have.
Her.
Yes, I love that movie.
It's a very interesting story.
Joaquin Phoenix. Yes.
You create even wife through
Yes.
intelligent operating system.
Yes.
So, what do you think of that movie? And then maybe other things in the future. Things will they have a more smartness in it? Or?
Every man who has a wife has an intelligent wife. Yeah, I think that you see, it's interesting to see. I love science fiction movies, and it's always interesting to see the things that the movie makers think are easy. And whenever they do intelligence, it seems to be trivial to have like a natural language conversation or to make inferences based on very little data. And these things are phenomenally hard, and so this frontier, this 21st century frontier in technology is definitely how do you get all these arbitrary, uncertain inputs and then respond in a meaningful and relevant way. And it's incredibly, so if you, in that movie, you have this character that is automatically able to do that, right? But then I don't know if you guys have like Netflix here or something, but you look at what Netflix recommends for the movie you should watch next, or what Amazon thinks the book you should buy is, and it's normally horrible. It's terrible. And so that's the gap right now between reality and imagination.
Yes, thank you. So just the last couple of minutes, I'd like to ask you, I don't know whether you understand the Korean structure as a society. Everybody wants to live in Seoul because a lot of things are happening in Seoul.
I want to live in Seoul.
The government wants to create the sort of a creative economy and the innovation centers, 17 of them throughout Korea. And we have one in Daejeon, and then another one in Daegu, and there will be 15 more. I noticed that you moved from LA,
Yes.
which is a very nice big city, to Austin, Texas.
Yes.
Not many Koreans may move from LA to Texas, but what motivated you to move to Texas?
We have lots of
LA?
Koreans in LA, by the way. And
North
I
Koreans?
think it's the biggest Korea town outside of Korea is in Los Angeles. Very good food there. So it's interesting that you can do that now. The benefit, so LA is on one edge of the United States, and before that I lived in Boston, which is on the other edge. And that's really how the US has evolved, by the way. If you ever go to America, everything's happening on one coast or the other, and there's kind of nothing in the middle. And that's changing, and Austin, Texas is kind of in the middle. And it's because of the internet. It really, I mean, I'm as connected to anything I need to be in the world now. I don't have to wait for the mail to bring me things. I don't have to go to the library to get information to write my books. You know, everything is there in my office at home. The only thing that has to move physically now is me. And being in the middle of the United States is much better than being on one side or the other if you have to travel, because you're just a few hours away from any place in the country. So this is a really interesting question, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens to cities as we see more and more knowledge work dominate the economy. Because you don't need to be where everybody else is all the time anymore for anything. And I think that just as we've moved to distributed computing systems, we are going to move to distributed nations. And that's a good thing, because you can only get so many people into Seoul.
Thank you so much. Now, our time is up. So what last advice would you give to Korea for the future?
Send your children to KAIST, obviously. Honestly, I think you have every reason to be confident. The Korean miracle of the last 10 or 20 years does not need to end here. And if you want to change anything, you know, recognize that there's another Samsung waiting to be built. There's some kid who is getting his PhD right now who has the potential to build a company which is, you know, the biggest company in Korea 10 or 15 years from now. In fact, there's many, many kids like that, and everything you can do to enable them. If you bet on 20 and one succeeds, you will be repaid many, many times.
Thank you so much. Let us give a big round of applause.
Thank you.